This video is going to go over questions that are from the standard and factored form quiz. So if you have other questions about this, just let me know and I can make a video or answer those questions. But the first one is when you're looking at an equation, y equals x squared plus 3, using the given inputs. The first thing to remember is inputs means x values, and then outputs, it says into the corresponding ordered pairs. In other words, we want to find the y values and then we're going to put them in x, y ordered pairs. So we're going to have a -2, comma something, -1, comma something, 0, comma something, 1, 2, etc. So the inputs are the x values. So whatever we have for x, we're going to put it into the original equation and solve for y. So this first one, we're just going to put in -2, y equals -2 squared plus 3, and a negative times a negative is a positive, so that's going to be 4 plus 3, so that will equal 7. So my first, if this is 7, but when I enter it as ordered pairs, then I would write -2 comma 7. Then I'd do the same thing. I'd put in -1 for x squared, so y equals -1 squared plus 3. A positive 1 is 1, or -1 times -1 is a positive 1, plus 3 equals 4. And so my next one would be -1 comma 4. So when you're filling the table out, you're just putting in the x values, finding for y, and then when you write the answer, you put them in x, y ordered pairs separated by a comma. Make sure you look at the preview so you know it looks like what you want. If you have two ordered pairs and they're the x-intercepts and you're asked for the line of symmetry is the midpoint of the x-intercepts. Okay, it's always halfway between, because if we have a parabola, let's just draw one here, and I've got the parabola that goes something like this. Remember, here's our midpoint, or our x-axis. Parabolas are symmetrical. So if it crosses the x-axis at these 2 points, halfway through here's our vertex right here. That's also the line of symmetry, the x equals, and a line of symmetry is always an x equals equation. So all we need to do is we need to find the midpoint of this, and that is where the axis of symmetry is. That also gives us, when we find the midpoint, that also gives us the x coordinate of the vertex. So to find the midpoint, we just take the x values, -9 plus 7 divided by 2. Add, divide by 2. That gives us the midpoint. So that's a -2 over 2, which equals a -1. So x equals -1 is the line of symmetry. In this case, we've got a standard form, and we're going to find the vertex, the x and y intercepts, and then we're going to graph it. So what is the vertex of the parabola? Remember, the vertex, if it's in standard form, I like to use this -b over 2a is the vertex. That's the line of symmetry, but I can also find the vertex point by this, because we can find the x value, and then once we know the x, we substitute in for y. So remember, this is the standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. So I'm going to identify b and a, and we're going to substitute in b and a right there. So if I put this in, I'm going to have a -b, which would be this is a +6, so -6 over 2, and if there's not an a there, it's a 1. If there's no coefficient, it's a 1. So that's 2 times 1. So that's -6 over 2, which equals a -3. So the vertex is a -3, comma, that's the x value. Now the y value is we put -3 back into our original equation and solve for y. So I'd say -3 squared plus 6 times -3 plus 9. So negative times a negative is going to be a positive. This is a -18 and +9. And 9 minus 18 plus 9 is 0. So my vertex point is at -3, 0. At that point, I could graph that first point right on the graph right there. That's going to be my vertex. And when you're doing this on the computer, obviously you're going to drag this over, but this is just a screenshot, so I can't. So identify the x-intercepts of the parabola. Okay, so what are the x-intercepts? That's where y equals 0. So that's y equals 0. X-intercepts mean where does it cross the x-axis, which is at the point y equals 0. So to solve that, I'm going to take 0 equals x squared plus 6x plus 9. Now this is where we have to remember how to factor. So if we have x squared plus 6x plus 9, that's going to factor into x plus 3 times x plus 3. And since they're both the same, then we set it equal to 0, but they're both going to be the same number. So I say x plus 3 equals 0, subtract 3, so x equals a negative 3, comma 0. And so in this case, because they're both the same, then there's only one x-intercept. It's negative 3 comma 0. Now if this were something like x plus 3, x minus 2, you would set each of those equal to 0 and you would have two x-intercepts. So it would be negative 3 and x minus 2 equals 0, and add 2 to both sides, you get x equals a positive 2. So just be careful of that, because if that's how we find the x-intercept. In this case, there's just one x-intercept and it's at the same point. So now we're going to have to find the y-intercept, and that'll help us graph this parabola. So what does the y-intercept mean? Y-intercept means x equals 0. So we use our same equation up here, and we say y equals 0 squared plus 6 times 0 plus 9. And that's just 9. So the y-intercept is 0 comma 9. Make sure you read the directions. If it asks to enter it as an ordered pair, do that. So then I would plot my next point, 0, 9, and then I would have a parabola. And when you drag those points, it will draw your parabola correctly. Just keep in mind, you need a vertex and you need one other point to get a parabola. And so in this case, the vertex and the x-intercept is the same. So that's the same point. So we have to get one other thing. If f of x equals 5x squared minus 45, find the x-intercepts and find the vertex. So again, this is standard form. It may not look like standard form, but standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. Well, if there's no x term, this would be like 5x squared plus 0x minus 45. So it's still in standard form. To find the x-intercepts, we're going to set y equal to 0, and we get 5x squared minus 45. Now to solve this one, I'm going to factor 5 times x squared minus 9, and that's going to be x squared minus 9 factors into x minus 3 times x plus 3. And when I do that, I can see that these are my two things that I have to set equal to 0, because if any part of this is 0, then the whole thing is 0, because we're just multiplying. So if I put in x minus 3 equals 0, so x could be positive 3, and x plus 3 equals 0, so x could be negative 3. So my two x-intercepts are, and in this case, you'll notice it doesn't say ordered pairs, and it just has this x equals already here. So you just have to write negative 3 comma 3. Those are the x-intercepts. That's where it crosses the x-axis. Now we want to find the vertex of the parabola. Well, the vertex of the parabola, again, it's in standard form, so I'm going to do a negative b, which is 0, over 2 times 5. Well, that's just 0. So my vertex point is 0. And when I put in 0 for x, then I get 5 times 0 squared minus 45. And that gives me negative 45 is my y value. All right, if this is in polynomial form, this is in factored form. X minus a, x minus b. All a and b are where does it cross the x-axis. So in this case, that's just a negative 1 and a positive 2. When it's in factored form, this tells us the x-intercepts. And remember, if I put x minus negative 1, that's x plus 1. And if I set that equal to 0, x equals negative 1. That's where I get this. So sometimes people get confused on whether it's negative or positive. If it's already in factored form looking like this and you're finding a and b, you just put wherever it crosses. If it's like this and you're trying to solve it, you have to set it equal to 0. So like this case, we have to set it equal to 0. So we say x plus 4 equals 0, so x equals negative 4, and x minus 2 equals 0, so x equals a positive 2. So that gives us our two x-intercepts, but that doesn't tell us where the vertex is. So in order to find the vertex, so I've got 2 and -4. Well, that's not enough to graph a parabola. I could graph lots of lines that go through that. I could make it skinny, I could make it wide, lots of things. So we need to find the vertex. The vertex is the midpoint of these two x-intercepts. So remember and I could count, I could say that, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, whoops, I don't think I did. 1, 2, 3 in would be the axis of symmetry. Okay, or I could just add -4 plus 2 divided by 2 equals -2 divided by 2 equals a -1. So x equals -1. That gives me the vertex, the x value, and then to find the y value, we take -1 and we put it in for x and we solve. And so in this case, I'm going to have -1 plus 4 times -1 minus 2. So that's a +3 times a -3. So that equals -9. So f of x equals -9. That's my other vertex point. So now I can go 1 and then -9's down here. And now the parabola will be drawn correctly. So that's factored form. Zeros, this gets some students. Zeros means that's the same thing as x-intercept, because y equals 0. When y equals 0, what is the value? So basically, what is the x-intercept? And all you have to do is set x plus 5 equal to 0 and x plus 4 equal to 0. So x equals -5 and x equals -4. And it says enter multiple answers separated by a comma. So we just put -5, -4, or x equals -5, -4. Okay, finally, here's another one in factored form that we want to take a look at and graph and find the x-intercept. So x-intercept, if it's in factored form, they basically are given to you. All you have to do is say x plus 1 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0. And notice it says we want them as ordered pairs. So that's going to be -1, 0, comma, -3, 0. Okay, what's the y-intercept? Remember, y-intercept is when x equals 0. So we put in f of x. Oops, let's do it down here. F of x equals 0 plus 1 times 0 plus 3. So that's 1 times 3, which equals 3. So my y-intercept is 0, comma 3, because that's where x equals 0. Then the equation of the line of symmetry. The equation of the line of symmetry is the midpoint of the x-intercepts. So -1 plus -3 divided by 2 is a -4 divided by 2, which equals a -2. So, and it's an x equals equation. X equals -2. The vertex is always the same. The x value is always the same as the line of symmetry. So we have a -2. And then we just substitute back into our original equation to find out what the y is. So -2 plus 1, -2 plus 3. So that's a -1 times a +1, which equals a -1. So -2, comma, -1 would be my vertex. And then to plot it, you're going to plot the vertex and then one other point. So you plot the vertex as -2, -1. You drag that over to there. And then you can choose any other one of these points. You can choose -1, 0, 0, 3, -3, 0, any of those, and the parabola will be drawn correctly. So if I put -3, 0, which is right there, you're going to have a parabola that looks like that. Okay, if there's other questions, please let me know.